Ladies and gentlemen, dear online users, I wish to welcome you to this online discussion this afternoon. I am pleased to take you through the discussions as moderator. And today we are discussing a very important issue, and that is the role of men in championing gender equality in decision making. I must say that I am doubly pleased because I've been a member of the International Gender Champions, an initiative that was launched in 2015. And this initiative has been very instrumental in getting leaders across the globe to commit to restoring gender balance in international fora. I am therefore glad that iKNOW Politics, a platform of which the IPU is a founding partner, has collaborated with International Gender Champions to organize this exchange today. As Secretary General of the Inter-parliamentary Union, the global organization of parliaments, I can say that promoting gender equality is in our DNA. In my day-to-day work, it is our core objective to ensure that men and women can participate in governing institutions on equal footing, because we believe that it is a matter of democracy, it is a human right. In fact, a legitimate and efficient parliament is one that reflects society and is in tune with society in all its diversity. So I'm particularly pleased to have been asked to moderate this exchange today. When I committed to doing this, I didn't know that I was going to be in Togo. And I'm glad that technology is working out very well this afternoon so we can have a fruitful discussion. The IPU has been tracking women's participation in parliament for a long time. And in recent years, we have witnessed a slowdown in progress. As we speak, we have only 23.4% women among members of parliament in the world. Some parliaments, unfortunately, still have no women members at all. The good news is that there are ways to achieving substantial progress in women's political participation. And we have evidence that parity is a reality. In fact, in a number of parliaments today, we do have parity in Rwanda, Bolivia, as well as in the upper chamber of the Belgian parliament. Can you hear me, Michael?
Okay. Unmuted. Okay.
Yes. We are muted.
We are muted.
Now we are unmuted. Okay.
Oh, good.
Okay. Very good. I was saying that gender parity is a reality in a number of parliaments in the world, in Rwanda, in Bolivia, and in the upper house of the Belgian parliament. So there's evidence that progress can be made in this regard. And today, we see that in some 30 or some 1/3 of the parliaments in the world today, we have women that account for 30% or more of global parliamentary representation. So that's good. That's the good news. However, we have to strive for greater progress, and that's why I think we're here today. And there are mechanisms that have proven their worth. We have gender quotas that are important in leveling the playing field. What we require now is strong leadership not only from women, but also from men. And this is because most leaders in the world today are men. Without the vision of men leaders, without their commitment, we cannot hope to achieve anything substantial in the area of gender equality. So this debate today, I hope, will help us create awareness of those mechanisms that are out there, those commitments that are out there that we can mobilize in order to enhance the participation of women in leadership around the world. It is my pleasure to announce that to have organized this discussion, we have, true to our reputation, Michael, of gender champions. We have a gender balanced panel today. We have with us Ambassador Nazhat Shameem Khan, the permanent rep of the Republic of Fiji at the United Nations in Geneva, and advisor to the presidency, the COP23 presidency. We have, in the name of gender balance, Michael Møller, my colleague of the Director General of the UN Office at Geneva, and Ambassador Elayne Whyte Gómez, permanent representative of Costa Rica. She has several titles. She has piloted the adoption of a binding treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me in this discussion. We will start straight away with the questions to you to set the ball rolling. And I do understand that we will be able to take a number of questions from the floor. Let me start with you, Nazhat. You have an interesting profile. You have been the first woman Chief Justice in Fiji, and I think that it was not without difficulties. Can you tell us exactly how the male community have been instrumental in helping you achieve those things that you have achieved in your career so far? If you do have any examples of those men out there that have supported you, it would be good for our online viewers to know. Please, over to you. I give you some 5-6 minutes to answer.
Thank you very much, Martin. Just to clarify, I was not the first woman Chief Justice. I was the first woman judge in Fiji. And okay. I think really the first man who made a difference to the way that I was developing and to the empowerment, not just of myself, but of my sisters, was my father. He had 4 daughters and no sons. And he taught us that education was one of the most important catalysts for empowerment and for change, and insisted on that all his daughters should be educated. And he also taught us that really there are no obstacles that girls and boys cannot overcome if they really wish to be self-empowered and determined to achieve their goals. So I think my father, and then of course when I went back to Fiji after university and found myself in an almost entirely male-dominated legal profession, the director of public prosecutions, who was a man, who decided that it was time to open the DPP's office to women at last. And that was in 1983. So, you know, that decision of his made a difference to my ability to work in a profession that I already loved. And then, of course, a Chief Justice who said to me when I was taken on as the first woman judge that we have recruited you knowing that you will change things, and we welcome that. And that was a very important statement by the Chief Justice, because many people are afraid of change, and they're afraid that women will be catalysts for change, that they will come and turn the whole world around. Here was the Chief Justice who was saying, you're a woman, and I want you to turn the whole world around. I want you to change the way the judiciary is. I think these were the important decisions made by male leaders in my life. But a very important question for a place like Fiji is, what is the relationship between culture and gender? What do you do when you're bringing up a girl who is really being subjected to a lot of cultural norms, cultural expectations of what a girl should be and what a girl should do, marriage being at the top of that list? A real challenge for male leaders, fathers and husbands and brothers, is to learn how to work for empowerment whilst not saying to people that culture is irrelevant. So this is an important relationship between culture and gender. Culture is intended to empower and to help with self-identity. It is not intended to weaken you or to remove from you the ability to empower yourself. And so, you know, it's very important that our male leaders in our communities, particularly in communities that we have in Fiji, diverse cultural communities, to understand that culture should not disempower. And when it begins to disempower, that actually that particular cultural norm is not working for equality and for society. And so there's an important role for men to work with women in partnership to ensure that the culture does not submerge this need to be inclusive and equal. So I think in a country like Fiji, such an important role for male leaders, for male members of a family, to really help women to move forward and recognize their full potential and not allowing cultural norms to stand in the way. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I like that phrase, culture does not disempower. I don't think that there's any culture that should prohibit women from acceding to decision-making in the world. And I think your experience, we do understand, started from home and then went on to the workplace. You need these various stakeholders in the chain, the support, as we were saying earlier, commitment to gender equality at all levels. And I like the good foundation that your father laid for you to rise to those positions that you have occupied. Let me turn to Michael now. And Michael, as I said during the introduction, you were a founding partner in the International Gender Champions Initiative, and it's made a lot of headway, started from Geneva, goes on to New York, and now it's spreading all over the world like wildfire. Now, tell me, you run the UN office at Geneva. How are you taking the message to the UN office in Geneva? How are you seeking to promote gender equality in the UN? In fact, how are you walking the talk?
It's a daily task, but let me just pick up from where what Nazhat said. It is really a matter of changing the culture. I mean, the UN organization, as a child of 190-something countries, is and has been for the last 70 years a very male-dominated organization, and we need to change that, and we're in the process of doing so. So within the organization here in Geneva, and not just within the one that I manage myself, but also trying to push my colleagues who are heads of other organizations in the UN family and beyond, is really a part of a daily conversation. It's part of changing the structures. It's part of changing the habits in the bureaucracy. So some of the things I did from the beginning when we established this was to, first of all, establish a policy, a gender policy, which the organization didn't have, and to make sure that it gets implemented. We have created a number of focal points in every single office throughout the building. We follow up. There is accountability mechanisms. We have included the gender issue in the evaluation, the evaluation of our staffs. We have changed the way that we train. All our training modules now, particularly the induction training of new staff, has a gender element in it. We are also doing a lot on changing hidden biases and doing training on that. And I'm very, very, very attentive to the way we recruit, and it has given already some results. The building you see behind me is now almost 50-50 in terms of female and male. In the higher echelons of the bureaucracy, which is always the hardest one to change. We moved from 2015, we were about 34% at the top levels of women. We are now somewhere between 41 and 45%, and we are steadily improving. But it's a matter also of as you say, walking the talk. I am very careful, as are more and more of our colleagues in Geneva and elsewhere now, not to participate in any kind of discussions where both genders are not represented, and showing so very forcefully. I mean, I will walk out of a room if I see that that principle is not maintained, and it has changed the way that we work. Now, all of this is intended. It's not just a symbolic issue or activity. It's very much intended to make sure that the voice of women gets empowered in all of our discussions. It's not just a matter of leading, but it's also a matter of setting the foundation in which people will learn, which our junior staff will change their habits and their reflexes, in which you change the culture and sort of existentially change the organization's genetic makeup to make sure that the gender parity issue disappears as an issue and becomes completely normal in the way that we manage our affairs. And this is a conversation that goes beyond, as I said, just what I am responsible for, and in terms of numbers of staff. It's a conversation I have with all members of our society here, and it is quite interesting to see that it is giving it's becoming quite popular. I've had several heads of multinational corporations who have come to me and said they like what we're doing here, and they're implementing it in their own communities. Initially, this was meant to be something for permanent representatives and heads of organizations. We now have politicians, we have business community, we have heads of NGOs, we have heads of academic institutions. Everybody is coming on board. It's a step-by-step approach, but I've been very gratified to see how fast it caught on. I think most of us were quite surprised with the speed with which this was accepted and embraced. I think it was just a matter of being at the right place at the right time. And so now in Geneva, it's completely uncool not to be a gender champion.
Yes, it's really uncool. I think so. I think peer pressure has caught on, I think.
Yes.
Which is just fantastic. And I am amazed at what has been achieved in under 2 years. The issue of changing the culture of the workplace is very important. I know there's resistance, but gradually people are learning that it's uncool to challenge some of those virtues of gender equality. Thank you very much, Michael. I will go on to Elayne. Now, when I introduced you, Elayne, I said that you were chairing that group that negotiated the internationally binding agreement on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. When you look at the negotiating table, negotiating disarmament issues, especially nuclear weapons, generally it's males who sit around the table. Now we find a woman who has made headway and is there at the table and playing a prominent role. Surely, like Nazhat, you had some male figures in your professional life that were gender sensitive. Can you tell us about your success story? Are there any men that out there that were models for you who helped you make sure that you could play that legitimate role?
Thank you. When Nazhat was talking, I really was able to relate to my own story because it was my father, also the first one that taught me into education and the importance of education for our lives. And it just brings me to this other reflection that, of course, male champions, male can play this role of gender champions, not only in their professional, but also in their personal lives. And I do think it has been fundamental, at least in my case, and I understand that also for Nazhat, to have fathers who empower you from the beginning and who do not give you limiting beliefs. I happened to read a book. I actually took part in a presentation of a book here in Geneva at the library, which was a recount of 50 years of female leadership. It was about 50, it's a compilation of women who had either been heads of state or government throughout the world. And there were very interesting issues, but the first one is that most of them had been brought up in political families. So that, of course, was very important in their perception of their potential. They did not receive limiting beliefs as to their role in the future. I also like to mention that 90% of those women leaders had families on their own. So that also helps us get rid of another myth that if you pursue female leadership in the political arena, you have to become a completely different kind of woman. You can be, play the traditional role, having aspirations in your personal life, family, children, everything, but also contributing to society and exerting leadership roles. I do understand in my case, I have had male mentors who have believed in me since I was young, even from the moment in which I was a student. They have believed in me and they have opened doors and opportunities for me. But now that I look back, I realize that they also have asked me to make changes to where I have been. So it is very interesting because not only they have believed in myself, but also they have entrusted me with very difficult and challenging tasks to promote change, both at the institutional level and also in promoting legislation. For instance, the first piece of legislation against sexual harassment in the workplace was something that I worked together with my boss, and I would have to say also in leading the negotiations on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, that has also been the case, that I was entrusted with a very challenging task to promote change in diplomatic history at the UN.
Thank you very much, Elayne. Your story, very familiar, similar to Nazhat, as you have said. And the key word is that you were encouraged, you were educated to become a leader in order to promote change. You were not encouraged to become a leader to be a figurehead, which is something very, very crucial. The people believed in your intrinsic worth. And the foundation, the strong family foundation, I can identify with. And if you may allow me to tell my own story, when I was growing up in Africa, I grew up in a society where young girls were supposed to be bred to become wives, housewives. And the boys were the ones that went to the best schools and became leaders in society. But in our home, my father did not take that. He went against the cultural norm, and all of us had access to the same education. There were no boys or girls in our home. And this is very helpful because today I have sisters who are very strong in their societies. And I hope that this story can spread in many African countries today. We've had the three of you giving your experiences, and I believe that we have focused a lot on women in international fora. But let me go back to the introduction that I made about women in politics. It's important that women also be present where decisions are being made in political institutions. And of course, surely there are lots of challenges here. I would like to hear from you what your views are on how we can promote more women in leadership positions in the political arena. Can we start with Michael this time?
We can. Again, it's a matter of attitude and of education and of thinking outside the box. You were all telling stories, so let me tell you a small story that happened to me and there was a kind of a mini epiphany for me. I must have been around 14 or 15. I was living in Denmark at the time, and I opened the newspaper, and the front page tells us that the major women's organization in Denmark, we're talking about sometime in the 70s, elected a man as a Secretary General. That was completely out of the box, completely counterintuitive, but actually woke me up to this issue of gender parity, and more importantly, of understanding that when you are looking for leaders, the business of gender really shouldn't come in as long as we have met these parity demands. So from then on, it always something that stayed with me and has kind of reminded me of the importance of having a gender-blind policy in whatever I do, and really go for quality. Now, how do we reinforce? I think that, as I said, it's both a There are ways of doing it in the short term, pushing like we have done with the gender champions, and where more and more politicians are coming on board. Some politicians, because they really mean it, others because they find that is, as I said, it's no longer cool not to be a champion, and they want to look good to their public and to their voters. Either way, it is changing the atmospherics. It's changing the framework within which our societies are beginning to look at these issues. But we have to go a little deeper. We have to look at how we educate our kids. We look at how the press treats this issue. We have to start from the bottom as well and make it a long-term project that goes hand in hand with whatever tools we can find that are pressing us, that are pushing it forward in the day-to-day. And we have to set examples. I think that the champions, wherever they are and wherever they come from, can accelerate that process by talking about it, by setting examples both in the way that they appoint their staffs and the way they, as leaders, surround themselves, how much they really walk the talk in terms of creating that environment in their workplaces that will make it not just a requirement, but something completely normal, that women and men are treated completely equally and based on merit and not on gender. And so I think that it's a whole set of activities that we have to do, and in each one of them we have to kind of overcome prejudices, hidden biases, as I said before, that are really in some societies very deeply built in. In my society, I come from Denmark, it's not as it's much more accepted, if you want, and than in many others. But even there, I think that different countries, different nationalities, different cultures have a responsibility to set an example, to set standards and set norms across the world. It's a long-term job, but we're moving all of a sudden a little faster than we used to.
Yeah, right. It can be done, and so we should endeavor to speed up efforts. Elayne, I think I know this, but can you tell us how women are faring in Costa Rica, in the Parliament of Costa Rica, in the Congress of Costa Rica? You know?
38%. I don't recall the exact number.
Okay, 38%. That is way above the global average, which is 24.3%. Okay,
34.
great.
24. The
Well
global
above.
averages.
You're well above.
Okay, but not good enough.
Your index is very useful. I use it as a reference for the universal periodic review that is conducted by the Human Rights Council. So for assessing how women are doing in each society, I use the IPU's index.
Thank you very much. That's great. Let me just correct what I said. It was 23.4%. The global average of women in parliament is 23.4%. So it makes Costa Rica look even better. Now tell me, what is it we can do to increase that percentage? What can we do? Do you believe in those special temporary measures such as quotas, reserve seats, and all that? What can we do?
Well, let me tell you, I do believe in those temporary measures. They are, I think we can have many talented women, but in order to promote change, we need to have those opportunities also actually to promote change in those who are making the decisions. I think that was very important for me at some point in which I was appointed Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. I was very young, but at the same time I was a woman. And it was a government that was promoting the appointment of almost parity cabinets. So it was a very important measure in advancing, my opportunities. I think also, to design those temporary measures at the legal point of view, but also to design control and follow-up mechanisms, because you can have the law designed in such a way that the moment that you implement it, maybe you can find other ways of going around it. So, which I think was the case of Costa Rica, that at some point we were at like sixth at the world stage. And then we lowered a little bit because the other countries performed better. And at some point, our political leadership was not following as strongly these norms that were developed. But there's another aspect that we also have to work on, which is also going back to the myths. Because in some societies, there is a perception that we have to promote, to give women the opportunity, because we need to deliver better societies and better governments, and we need to, to change the world. We might do so, but that is not the reason why we need to promote the participation of women in politics. It is because it is our birthright as human beings and as members of society that we have the right to participate in the stewardship of the societies. So that is the first. It is our birthright, and it is a public good. And of course, we already know that societies' development do benefit from the fact that women can participate in politics. So we also have to be very careful in assigning these extraordinary standards to the way that we perform, because we are human beings, and most of the times we excel, and female leadership does excel, but that is not the reason why we need to have the opportunity. And we should also be very careful in not assigning a different measure and an extraordinary standard in assessing our performance, as opposed to the traditionally male leadership. I think that is very important, because many women feel pressured that they have to become a superwoman in order to have access to those political positions. I think that is not the fact. We have to be ourselves. We have to not to feel pressed that we also have to develop different traits and values, that we have to work on our own traits and our own skills and strengths, and to excel them, but also keeping in mind that we will always be women, and this is something that we are also bringing our own female traits to the table.
Thank you very much, Elayne. Did I hear you mention violence just at the tail end of your response a moment ago, that women are victims of violence? Did you mention that? No,
I did not, but I think that it is very important to have women in decision-making structures, but especially in those places where the rules and the norms of the societies are designed, so that we can promote institutions, policies, and values that that address the issue of violence that we may face.
Okay. Before I go to Nazhat, let me just go back to Elayne. Elayne, you come from a region, Central America, where violence against women is rife generally. Maybe not Costa Rica in particular. Do you think that this is an obstacle to women's political emancipation?
Yes, of course. I think it is. I think because women might be afraid of exerting leadership and the consequences that might have on their personal lives. And this is the reason why education, to give the men a completely different mindset about their role vis-a-vis, or the role of women vis-a-vis their own, as being equal, is fundamental, so that they don't they don't have to fear they will undergo personal consequences, especially in their personal lives, as I said, in their families, in their potential to develop a family, which is something that's also inherent in our rights.
Okay. Martin,
yes, Michael, you wanted to...
I wanted to give a really good example of, since you speak about violence against women, of of a woman leader who did something about it and actually got some really quite extraordinary results. So the current Secretary General of the Commonwealth, when she was Minister of Justice in the United Kingdom, put in place some programs that reduced in a very short period of time, a number of very few years, violence against women in society by almost 60%, completely changing the dynamics in the society and showing what a determined woman leader who has, obviously would have this particular issue much more at heart than most men in politicians would have, can achieve if she puts her mind to it. It was quite extraordinary results.
Yeah, you need some strong men and women to drive that agenda forward. I raise this matter because I know there is an online participant who referred to the need to curb Odette Abi. He refers to the need to curb hate speech, because this is something that is a deterrent to women's political participation. Now, let me go to Nazhat. Do you think that this is a problem in Fiji? By the way, what is the percentage of women in parliament in Fiji?
It's much better than it was.
Yeah.
I think it's, if I'm not wrong, it's about 40% now. Am I right? We now have a Speaker of Parliament who is a woman. And we've got a larger number of cabinet ministers who are women now than ever before. Certainly our percentage has gone up from previous parliaments. 16. Sorry. No, sorry, we're under your average at 16%, so I was wrong. But on the issue of getting higher number of women everywhere, including in parliament, I think we have to really address the cause rather than the symptom. So I see gender-based violence, fewer women in parliament, fewer women in leadership positions, fewer CEOs, partners in law firms, and so on, as a symptom of a very grave inequality in society, which is really born of patriarchal attitudes. And these patriarchal attitudes really do believe in the subordination of women. And so if we are to ask men and women to act in partnership, to remove patriarchy as an institution, then we have to encourage men and women, because we can't exclude women from the need to be gender competent. There are many women who are not gender competent. And so therefore, really training people and exposing them to the need to look at everything through a gender lens, and to being aware of the impact of patriarchy on every other thing in society. So for instance, if you have an attitude about women as a young person, then that translates to domestic violence or rape. It may translate to violence in the workplace, sexual harassment in the workplace, all of which ultimately exclude women from positions of empowerment. And I think also a very delicate exercise is to differentiate gender sensitivity and competence from gender stereotyping. So understanding how barriers in society may impact on the lives of women should include an acceptance that not every woman is the same, and that the barriers may impact individual women in different ways. And so, my life cannot be seen as evidence that all women in Fiji are empowered and can become a judge, for instance. So it's very important that there is a differentiation between gender sensitivity and gender stereotyping, and also in understanding how what's going on in your mind is going to affect your decisions as a person who is holding a position of responsibility. So for instance, in training judges, and I was very interested to hear about the Commonwealth SG's role, because as a former Attorney General, she did a lot of very good work on gender-based violence, and had real effect, because I think in the work that she did, she realized that you had to actually follow through what's going on in your mind as a judge to how your judgments are going to be affected, to how your decisions then are going to affect the men and women in your courtroom. And I think that particular equation, that journey, is one that we need to expose men and women to in our society. This awareness about how your mind has a direct impact on the way that you treat people in your community, in your courtroom, in parliament, everywhere else. And I think until we reach that level of consciousness, we're not going to really effectively deal with the issue of disempowerment.
Okay, great. Do we all agree that the playing field today is not level for men and women across the world? Do we all agree?
Yes.
And if I asked you, we have identified some of the obstacles. Can you just give me one challenge in each of, and Michael, you don't represent your country, you represent the global community, but I want to hear from Fiji and Costa Rica, what single challenge you would want to be addressed in your country when it comes to promoting political participation of women? One. Nazhat?
I think I would like to see political parties in Fiji persuaded to see the process of nominating women as candidates through a gender lens. So recognizing what barriers there are which might prevent women from even putting their hands up to say, yes, I agree. I'd really like to see that kind of awareness.
Very good. By the way, let me commend the Speaker of the Fijian Parliament on being a true leader. She is not there as a figurehead. She is driving the SDG agenda forward in the Parliament of the and
yes, indeed. We're very proud.
She's a good example of women's leadership. I go on to Elayne. Elayne, what do you think? I know Diana has asked the question about the need to address indirect discrimination. What would you say about that?
Well, actually, let me even take the opportunity to correct the figure I gave. Costa Rica now stands, now the women participation in our parliament is 35%, and we came down from 38 to 35. So we lost ground, and the reason why we lost ground was because the laws that established this temporary special or positive discrimination policies were not very well implemented by our political parties. And this is where this takes us to analyzing the role of the tribunals of the electoral bodies, the ones that are in charge of foreseeing, the electoral games, rules of the game being fairly implemented. So I would say in our case, in Costa Rica, we need the political parties to follow faithfully the commitment and also the legal obligation for gender parity, but also it is necessary to see the what we call the Superior Tribunal of Elections to oversee the obligation of political parties to achieve this this parity. But then at the same time, we need more education to encourage women to participate, because at some point a couple of years ago we had the local elections for the local governments, and there was a very strong campaign by the Minister of the Condition of Women to encourage women to participate, even in TV advertisements and so on and so forth. And still the number of women that did take the role or to take the challenge to pursue that that objective was very small. So it brings me to believe what kind of additional measures you can undertake, because for instance you can claim that in terms of the work agenda, you promote certain services, childcare services for women to go to work, but not to exert political leadership. So if you have to do that after work or at night, you don't have those structures or those services at your disposal to help with the care of your family.
Thank you, Elayne. Michael, I know that. Yes.
I'm not going to be restrained by geographical dictates. So
yes.
I want to give you a solution which is much broader than the country by country.
Yeah.
And that is what happens in the General Assembly, which is the parliament of the world.
Yeah.
And where we looked at the numbers and our hair stood on end because it was pretty appalling. For the past 72 years, only 2 women have been presidents of the General Assembly. Three, my colleague tells me. But still, 3 out of 72 is pretty abysmal. And we looked at some of the numbers of the delegations who go to the General Assembly. and how many women are on those delegations, or on how many women actually speak for their country. It's about 10% or so. So we wrote to the President of the General Assembly, the previous one, and I have repeated it with the current one, and suggested actually that they pass a resolution to really push countries as much as they can, as much as the traffic will bear, to upgrade and put some parity into the national delegations that go to the General Assembly, to push member states to vote both for a female president but also for vice presidents. This year, out of, I'm not even sure how many vice presidents there are, about 15 or so, 20. Anyway, there's maybe 1 or 2 women who are vice presidents. So it doesn't work the way we would like it to work. So we're pushing hard there, and all of us, by the way, should continue pushing and bringing it up both at the national level but also at the level of the President of the General Assembly. And we're doing it. He's coming here next week, and I will push for it again.
Yeah, Nazhat, before I come to you, let me express my mea culpa. The IPU is guilty as charged. We in our 128-year history, we've had just 1 woman president of the IPU. But I know that we have a strong women's movement within the IPU now, and things are about to change. In any case, we are challenged. We need to be more proactive in this matter, as you have pointed out, Michael. But Nazhat, I give you 1 second before I go on to a question Ira has just asked.
Well, can I just fly 2 flags? One for you, and that is to congratulate you on the work that you have on gender parity in Parliament, because I think that has really encouraged and supported our women parliamentarians in Fiji. So I think well done, IPU. Secondly, on Fiji's progress, if I can just fly our flag for a while, from having no larger number than 5 in Parliament at any time, in the last election we had 9, and of the 9, 1's the Speaker. All the women voted in on the government side are holding ministerial positions, and the leader of the opposition is a woman. So this is really seriously a great message of leadership of women, and I think the visuals are as good as the substantive leadership, because these are not token women. These are women who are on the television all the time. They're taking leadership. They're taking strong gender roles, including our speaker, as you mentioned earlier. So I think all of that is really good news for the next elections, because I think all the young girls who are watching are thinking to themselves, I can do this. This is me one day, and this is very important.
Very good. Excellent. I couldn't agree with you more, and thank you. I blush when you commend the IPU. But let me go back to the challenges again. I see Ira Agri has just raised an issue, that of election financing. How are parliamentary elections being funded? Do you think that where you have made progress, I mean in Fiji and in Costa Rica, even in the Nordic countries, Michael, now you can wear a national hat, has there been
He's not allowed.
a determined program to make funding equitable for both men and women candidates? Nazhat, we're doing well, 40%. Surely resources are going to women candidates.
Resources are going to women candidates, but I think, much more fundamentally is recognizing the barriers to participation even before they get to Parliament. So recognizing the barriers in getting sufficient funding to stand in elections means looking at the way that political parties work. And this is not very well legislated. And in fact, there's a strong reason not to legislate that process. But nevertheless, it is very difficult for a woman candidate who may be a breadwinner to leave everything and take on what might be a very risky enterprise, because she may or may not win a seat in the elections. And then she may not be able to go back and retrieve the position she's left. So I think there's a very strong case for funding. I think there's a strong case for the availability of funding of women candidates in order to encourage their ability to stand in elections. But as I've said, I think that in the absence of any kind of legislation to this effect, it might be very difficult to implement.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. I think it's important to legislate on that. Elayne, Costa Rica, do you have specific funding going to women candidates?
No, we don't have specific funding, which is a very interesting concept. We have had throughout the history public funding for the elections, which is actually very important in order to promote as much of an open political system as possible to allow new forces to come into play. But out of that public funding, it will be very important to consider what kind of activities or services could be devoted to the promotion of women's careers, because as Nazhat was saying, it is a risky career, and sometimes measures that are taken by political parties to further democratize the decision-making process and the appointment of the officials to be elected can have a specific burden on women. Because if you require, for instance, the candidates for the legislature to win a lot of primary type of elections in their neighborhoods, at the county level, at the provincial level, and then at the national level, that places a special economic burden on everybody, but especially for women who, most of the people who need to go out of their households and their family to look for funding. And that will be harder for women, especially if we consider that more and more women are heads of households in Costa Rica. That is something that we have to we understand. They would not have spare time to devote to politics, and especially not spare economic resources for their campaigns.
Yeah, I see we're running out of time. This is a very exciting discussion, but I've seen some online participants raising very relevant issues that we can take up later with them. But Samara, I hope that through these discussions you have now understood what obstacles are out there to women's political representation at all levels. You have cultural norms, you have financial material constraints, you have a lack of awareness, education, and all of that that's out there. So I believe that you have understood why it is that women are not making the headway that we would like to see them make in politics. But the issue of sexism has come up. I think it was Caitlin, I think Caitlin or some, or Diana Hyman, who raises the issue of sexism in politics. How do we fight this? And if I may abuse my position as moderator, I can go back to the IPU. We did this study last year on violence against women politicians. And the first thing is, we realized that that issue is more widespread than people want to think. And it is because politicians are supposed to be the elite in society, and they're supposed to be the most protected. But then we see in society that they are the subject of violence. So first of all, I think there's advocacy that we have to play. We have to expose this issue wherever it occurs and let everybody know that it is not on. In Canada, I know that the Canadian Parliament has adopted a code of conduct outlawing sexism in Parliament, and parliamentarians signed up to that. Some people even legislate on this, issues that, or rather, practices or behavior that will not be condoned in Parliament vis-a-vis women. So we have to speak out against this. It's shocking what is happening. I hope that violence against women in the future should not be a major obstacle to their participation in political life. But maybe I should now give each of you one minute to wrap up. What is your takeaway from this discussion? How, if they asked you, how can the men partner with women promote gender equality? Nazhat, we started with you. 1 minute.
Number one, talk a lot about it. Make sure that there are focal points in your institution, and accept the fact that there's a need for change.
Great. Now, in the name of gender equality, Michael?
Well, I agree with Nazhat completely, and that's actually what we're doing. And as I said before, we have to talk more about it, we have to act, we have to think outside the box, and we have to drag the recalcitrants who are still in a majority with us.
Very good. Commitment, leadership. Elayne?
I call on all men to become male champions. Think about their daughters, sisters, cousins, their own family, their close ones. Believe in us and think there is no single way of exerting leadership. There are many different ways. The important is how effective leadership is. So be also open-minded to the different kinds of leadership that there are, and become a male champion of women empowerment.
Very good. Thank you very much. I think we will just, I'll just have a few parting words here and say that we believe, I hope that our online participants have been convinced that we are all agreed that gender equality is the name of the game. It is uncool to not be gender sensitive these days. That it is not enough, not uncool, but it is important for us to show, for those of us who are in leadership positions, show commitment. We see what has happened in Canada. Just because they have a leader that is gender sensitive, they have a 50-50 cabinet. And it's something that can be done. There is lots of evidence out there that gender parity is something that cannot be achieved. It is too slow. I think the pace is too slow. We need to step up the pace. And to do that, we have to identify the challenges. We have to, I think Nazhat, you said it, you have to identify the causes. You don't treat the symptoms alone. You have to identify the causes. And we have seen what the Family Foundation can play in promoting gender equality. We are seeing what at the professional workplace level, strong men leaders have been able to promote women into leadership positions because they believe in their talent and the qualifications and their ability to effect change. Of course, when women occupy these positions, it means the responsibilities are even greater, but they have to prove their worth. And we have seen in the case of the Fijian parliamentary speaker is very keen and active to show that she can be a strong leader. We have to continue to work to fight cultural bias. We have to change culture. As I think one of you said, there's no culture that should disempower women. And it takes me to likening society to a human being who has two eyes. And if you don't promote gender equality, it's like you close one eye and you insist on seeing with just one eye. And of course, your vision cannot be perfect with just one eye. So we have to do that. And I end with some expression that I love from an eminent Namibian politician. He says that strong men are never scared of strong women. We need a partnership of strong men and strong women to effect change in society. So let me, on behalf of the organizers, thank my fellow panelists and the participants that are out there online. Please know that this is not the end of the discussion. We, at least at the level of the IPU and I'm sure Michael at the UN, you will be eager to address some of the issues that we have not been able to address. It's an ongoing discussion. As I say, democracy is work in progress. And our ultimate goal is to achieve gender parity in the short run. I say in the short run. So thank you all and congratulations on an exciting panel.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you.